Good morning, I'm Dan McClellan from SuccessNC.org, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Instructional Design, Demonstrating Value Through Results. This webinar is brought to you by North Carolina Community Colleges and SuccessNC. During today's session, we'll address some important instructional design principles, such as being able to identify the true cost of learning, some strategies for creating real value, and we'll see some examples of these principles at work. Our presenter today is Dick Handshaw, president at Handshaw Incorporated, which is a learning services firm in Charlotte, North Carolina that specializes in custom content development, e-learning, consulting, technology services, and of course, instructional design. Dick has more than 30 years of experience as a learning and performance improvement professional. He's a respected thought leader, and he's presented at conferences such as American Society for Training and Development and International Society for Performance Improvement. And we're very glad to have him with us today to share his insight and experience. In just a moment, I'll turn it over to Dick and we'll begin the presentation. Now, throughout our session, we want to hear from you, so please type your questions and comments in the chat box located on the right side of the screen. I'll be watching the chat box and capturing all of your questions, and from time to time, I'll pop in so that Dick can address your question. Once again, thank you for being here, and now I'll turn it over to Dick Handshaw.
Thank you, Dan. The word value is kind of an overused term today. Everybody's talking about value for this and value for that. And I want to focus on the field of e-learning for a bit, because what we've noticed is that corporations, schools, everybody who manages and pays instructional designers to develop e-learning are looking for ways to cut cost. And they say that they're looking for value, and I want to give us a different way to look at value from what I think a lot of people are doing. We're going to do a little math, not my strong suit, but it's pretty easy math, so just stay with me here. We're going to talk about developing a course that is about 1 hour in length, and everybody looks at a thing called cycle time. In other words, how many hours does it take of development time to develop 1 hour of e-learning? And we're going to say that the development ratio for us, this is a fairly complicated course. I mean, I know some courses can be developed in 120 hours per hour is what I hear from people, and pretty much the top end of that spectrum is 200 hours per hour. So let's say we're developing a course that has maybe some simulation and some fairly rich media. So it's going to be 200 hours per hour of development. Now we're going to price our developer at $100 an hour. That's what we're going to pay our instructional designer. I'm sure everybody out there gets at least $100 an hour, right? So, okay, I'm using an inflated number on purpose because I want to make this look expensive. So our first hour of e-learning here is going to cost $20,000. Well, let's suppose we have been asked to cut the development time for that same product down to 125 hours. This is what everybody wants us to do more with less, do the same program, and instead of spending 200 hours to do it in 125 hours. So that's great. That's going to be $12,500 for a cost instead of $20,000. We just saved $7,500 by cutting development time by 37.5%. Well, what happens when you cut development time? Is it as good? So let's take a look at that. What people don't look at is how much it costs to take the course. They looked at, we just saw where we looked at how much development time we spent, and we cut that from 200 to 125. But how much does it take cost for people to take the course? Well, let's say we're doing a course for a fairly large company. It's something that needs to go company-wide, and it's 20,000 employees. I'm going to use a purposely low number for the cost per employee. Let's say they're only worth half as much as we instructional designers, and they're working for $50 an hour. So if you take a look at that, your course length is 2 hours. Just taking the number of employees times 1 hour, that's $1 million. And if you take it for our 2-hour course that we developed, that's $2 million is what it costs for those people to take that course. That's a number that a lot of people don't look at. Now, let's take a look at our other course, where we have 20,000 employees again. Cost per employee is 50, so that subtotal is $1 million. Now the course length is only 1 hour and 7 3/4, 1.75 hours. Somehow, by maybe using some performance support, by using some job aids, that sort of thing, we were able to cut the course length from 2 hours to 1.75 hours. So how much does it cost to take a shorter course? Obviously, it's going to be less. It's $1,750,000. And the course that was done in 1.75 hours is incidentally the one that we spent 200 hours to develop. We spent more time and we did it in less money. So we'll take a look at that total cost. If we add the developer cost to the 2-hour course, which was only $12,500, we have a total cost of $2,012,500. Now, if we look at the other course that was shorter, 1 hour and 45 minutes, but it had the high developer cost of $20,000, the learner cost is also lower, so it comes out to be cheaper. The course where we spent a little bit more money on development cost, because we were able to do a better job and do the same amount of learning in less time, it's less money. Basically what we did is the organization just spent an extra $242,500 to cut $7,500 in development costs. So what I'm saying here is that when people come to you and say, just do it faster, 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 more is better, faster is better, it's not necessarily so. Development time is a good investment to make sure that when you put that out in front of a bunch of people and spend their time, that you've developed learning that works. So that is my idea of how you need to look at value. So that brings me to why instructional design. And I think a lot of people may not actually know why the world invented instructional design and when that happened. Never in the history of the world was there a greater need to train so many people for such a difficult job with such high risk. That's the situation in which we needed to develop instructional design. The answer, of course, it was World War II. I think it was actually invented in England. The U.S. Air Force has a model that they invented quite a while ago that's actually a very popular one. The ADDIE model kind of comes down from that. Nobody really knows the origin of the ADDIE model. That's ADDIE. Everybody's heard of it. Everybody knows what it means, but we've kind of lost the actual origin of that particular model. Interesting point. So the big question here is instructional design still relevant today? And I think that's a question we want to pose to ourselves and try to prove through the rest of this presentation whether it's relevant for you. You know, I've been practicing instructional design since I got out of graduate school in 1979, and I have tried many different permutations, many different shortcuts, and over that time, using employees in my company and using measurement of everything we do, we've kind of worked out some strategies that I'll share with you that we know work and we know save time and we know add value to the process. So here they are, analysis, alignment, and using learners in the design process. Those are the basic things we're going to do. I'm going to start with analysis, and of course, I'm going to start with the objections. Anytime we mention to our clients that we need to spend time doing some analysis, or if I mention it to other learning departments, what we'll get back is, well, we don't have time for that. My clients don't understand, and I don't have the patience for all that analysis. Some people say that they're just trying to overanalyze, don't have time for that. And another one I think is with instructional design, you can't use it as a recipe and do it the same way every time. I think that's one of the problems with instructional design is people just say, well, give me these steps and let me do these steps every time and that's going to work. And that's not really true. Instructional design is a model. You're not really expected to do everything the same way every time. You want to make sure it fits the situation that you're in. And in talking about analysis here, I think that it can save money and create value. And, you know, I've done literally hundreds of projects here over the past 30 years, and I've had some projects where I skipped task analysis, and it always wound up costing me more money. So I made a list of when do I really need to do task analysis? And here's my list. If the task is something that's new and not yet validated, you obviously have to do a task analysis because you don't know what it is. The people who practice the task don't know exactly what works best. Management doesn't know what works best. So it's really important that you start with the end in mind. You say, I'm going to do a task analysis. I want to see a snapshot of what the perfect learner is going to do when they've finished with this learning. And that is that task analysis. Another situation in which we have to do one is we see if there's an existing task that has changed significantly, then we probably want to do a task analysis for that. So it's, again, if the task is new or if it's an existing task that has changed a lot, you have to do a task analysis. If there are multiple subject matter experts, this happens every time. We get into a project and we will have a number of subject matter experts to work with, and you go ask one and they'll tell you do the task this way. You ask another one, they'll tell you to do the task this way. You put them all in a room and they're going to fight about it. So obviously if we took the opinion of one subject matter expert, built the training that way, and then the rest of them looked at it, we'd be making a lot of changes. And that's the worst case scenario that costs us tons of money when that happens. So that's another reason we'll have to do a task analysis. Finally, if there are differing opinions between managers and performers regarding the task, we get this a lot. We'll go in and ask people who do the job and do the job well, tell me how you do this. We can take that and show it to a manager, and the manager will say, no, that's not how they're supposed to do that job. If we had developed the learning based on what the performers told us and then showed it to the managers, we're always doing it over again, and that's where the cost comes in. And the last example here is if the process for completing the task is not well documented, obviously you have to develop a task analysis for the same reasons as above. So those are my reasons for why we might have to develop a task analysis. Do we have any? Yeah.
Yeah, this is Dan. We do have a couple of questions from the chat box.
I thought we might at this point.
I want to encourage everyone to continue sending your questions in through the chat box. We'll do our best to address every one that we get. I'll put it on the screen. So the first question is, how did you and your staff learn to do a task analysis the way that you do it, and how can I learn to do it?
Okay, fair question, and I'll have to say that probably everyone who comes to work at Handshaw has to be taught task analysis the way we do it, but it's not that magic. I'm going to show you an example here of, this is a diagram of a combination type task analysis, and I'll explain that here. These steps across here, 1, 2, and 3, are procedural steps. So I do 1, and then I do 2, and then I do 3, and that's fairly easy to document. You watch somebody do it, you write down what they do, and you have the procedural task analysis. In order to do number 1, I might have to know certain things. So that would be, I have to know and master 1.2 before I can master 1.1. That's supposed to say 1.1, not 11. Over here under step number 2, I really have to be able to master 2.4 and 2.6 before I can do number 2. I also have to master 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3 before I can master 2.4. This is called a hierarchical task analysis. These are knowledge steps that I have to know before I can do the procedural step. So you can see how these are nested. This is just a sample, and I'm going to show you another one here. Sometimes we have strictly a procedural task analysis that's fairly complicated but doesn't have a lot of knowledge steps in it. And so we might diagram it like this. Again, note that 1, 2, 3, and 4 are going from left to right. These are going from left to right, which denotes that those are procedural steps. And if I go back over here, you can see that these go up. So the knowledge steps work up, and the procedural steps work left to right. And I'm going to show you a sample of a finished one. Here is one that we did for a recruiter in a recruiting process. And you can see also we've added a decision point here. We use a diamond for that, and there's a no and there's a yes decision. So and the yes decision goes up this way. But this is an example of an actual task analysis. And you can see if you can get this kind of a roadmap of what that person's supposed to do, you share it with the managers, you share it with the performers, you share it with the subject matter experts. You'll let everybody fight about it when it's a simple diagram like this. And then when you start the training, you're not going to be doing it over again. The thing that costs us so much money time and time again and also makes our clients unhappy with us is they have to do work over again. So task analysis is your best, by far, tool for keeping people from doing things over again. Okay, I've got a couple of case studies here to show you what kind of results we've had using task analysis. And this one is it was a revised curriculum on a pretty much the key task for this organization. It was a bank, and it's tellers, and this is their frontline workers are their tellers. So we did the entire revised the entire teller curriculum, and it took 4,500 hours of development time. Now, for those people who say I don't have time for task analysis, if you do it like we showed you, I don't think it should take too long. So what we did was we spent 270 hours out of the 4,500, and that's only 6.5% of our total budget. 6.5% investment to make sure that when people start doing a task, doing the training for a task, they're doing the right thing. That's a good investment. In this particular project, the task analysis correctly identified the scope and kept the project on time and on budget. We had no scope creep. And you can imagine with a project that big, scope creep can be pretty expensive.
Hey, Dick, I've got another question from the chat box. And this is a pretty big project. But the question is about task analysis. Is that necessary for small projects too?
Yeah, that's a good question. I pretty much could anticipate that. Well, I think the way to answer that, Dan, is to say that as long as you are, task analysis should take about 6 to 10% of your budget. So even on small projects, they can get out of control fairly quickly and become larger projects. So I think even with the smaller projects may be even more important. And you got to realize with smaller projects, you might be looking at doing a task analysis in a day. If you can get a conference call, or better yet, get a face-to-face meeting with the people who actually do that job or know that job, you can build a task analysis probably in a day. We use high-tech tools for that. We use a wall and sticky notes, and we simply write the tasks down on a sticky note. In fact, somebody asked earlier, how did our staff learn how to do this? I'll give you a web address at the end of the session where we have a resources tab, and on that resources tab, you'll find directions for how to do a task analysis. You'll find a lot of helpful tools there, and I'll refer to that again at the end of the project. So does that answer the question, Dan?
Yeah, I think so, Dick. Thank you.
Okay. I have one more case study on using a task analysis. This one was for commercial lending, because you can see we do work for a lot of banks here. This is fairly typical for us when we do a lot of software tools for any company. Everybody that puts out new software has to have training because it's brand new. Nobody knows how to use it. The trick is, for the training people, we're often faced with no source material, no current users because it's brand new software, and really no subject matter experts from the user's perspective. There are people who designed the system and can say, this is how the system works. There are people who use the old system and can say, this is how we did it with the old system. But it's really hard to find anybody who's an expert about how to use this software to do this job. There's people who know about the job and know about the software, but they don't know how to use the software to do the job. And what we have to do is teach how to use the software to do the job. So here's what we did. We interviewed the software developers and the workflow experts, and we got a walkthrough from them so we could see how it's supposed to work from the software side. Then we bridged that task analysis gap by conducting a second round of interviews with the different experts. So we would go back to people who did the job with the old system, kind of show them the new system and say, okay, how is this going to work in terms of doing the job with this new software? So we were guessing, we were trying to fill in the gaps, but we had to use a total of about 12 different individuals to do that. And yes, that took some time, but it was the only feasible way we could think of to build training that was going to work for a software system that was still being developed. And of course, nobody's going to wait 2 months or 3 months for the training to be developed once the software system is ready. They want the training to be ready at the same time the software system is. And this is a way that we figured out to do that. And again, task analysis is the only feasible way to be able to figure out how to do something that doesn't exist yet. Finally, here's the results from that project. We were really quite pleased at these results. We had an average of 5.5 review comments per lesson. In other words, I think it was about a 6-hour course, and probably these lessons that we're looking at here are 30 minutes apiece, and we had 5.5 reviewer comments per lesson, which meant probably some changes. That amounted to 2.8% rework for 8 courses. So it was really successful in being able to keep us on budget. We actually finished under budget, and we finished the project ahead of the due date, which really shocked the people in the software group that the training was ready before their software system was. That rarely happens. But again, task analysis saved us money and kept us on time. So this brings me to our second strategy, and that is alignment. You know, we have designers and subject matter experts and client sponsors, all these people who have an interest in how well the training performs. And one of the biggest challenges for us on projects was to get all those people to agree on a final solution. We struggled with it for years until we came up with this idea of a blueprint meeting. And actually, I got this from one of my clients. My clients always teach us good ideas. This was a woman who was vice president of HR at Krispy Kreme. Krispy Kreme, back in 2000, was getting ready to do their IPO, and they needed to develop a store manager training program. They were suddenly going from fairly regional company to a national company and eventually international. So they had to have a way to train people, not all at once for a month in Winston-Salem. They had to be able to get them, get as many skills in place as they could before they brought them to Winston-Salem. So we actually cut their training program in half from 4 weeks to 2 weeks, the in-person, and we did the rest of it with e-learning. But to get everybody together required a blueprint meeting that took about 3 hours. We asked managers from 7 different functional areas, like there was somebody who was in charge of finance, somebody who was in charge of cleanliness, somebody who was in charge of safety, somebody who was in charge of customer service. So we had all these different managers come together. They all had different expectations. And we presented our recommendation for measurement and our instructional strategy. Started a lot of discussion, a lot of questions. We didn't present our analysis data. We just presented our design recommendations based on the analysis data. During that 3-hour meeting, we got consensus from the SMEs and the project sponsor and the stakeholders, and we had a few learners in there too. We had a few people who are actually going to have to take this course telling us what they thought. So we had to paint some pictures on the wall. When they had questions, we'd go back to our analysis data and say, oh, well, what we found out in the analysis was this. And then whatever they're questioning us on, they might say, well, what you don't know is, and they'd give us some more information and we'd make a change. Or they would say, oh, that makes sense. I understand that now. Go ahead, do it that way. But we did have to make some revisions to strategies. We got feedback from the entire team. The important thing was, at the end of that 2 to 3 hour meeting, we had all those 7 managers, all who had different interests in getting performance out of this training program, all agreed that their needs were going to be met with the strategy for both instruction and measurement that we presented to them. And that was huge because we had a hugely tight time frame on this. The course had to be ready by the time they did their IPO. And there was you couldn't move that. So it really did a lot to not having second guessing through that project and keeping us on time and on budget. Here is a diagram of how we conduct a blueprint meeting. Starting on the upper right-hand corner, we would present a recommendation for measurement and instructional strategy. So we're just going to go in and say, here's what the program's going to look like, here's how it's going to work. We would get feedback from people, questions from people, gain consensus, and then, of course, we'd make necessary revisions on the feedback we got from the team. And there were always, we never have conducted a blueprint meeting that didn't come out with some changes. I think you want to get some changes out of that meeting. And once you do that, you get great ownership from the group, and everybody owns and supports that decision going forward. So here's the case study from that Krispy Kreme project. We had 7 lines of business represented in the blueprint meeting. It was a good solid 3 hours of discussion, some of it fairly serious discussion, but it was all good. We finally reached consensus from the entire team, and we completed that project. The most important thing was on time, and from our perspective, it actually came in a little bit under budget, so it was a big surprise for us that we were able to do that.
Dick, we've got another question. I think now would be a good time to take a look. The question is, how do you get people to agree to sit down for a 2 to 3 hour blueprint meeting, and who do you know, or how do you know who to invite?
Good question. It's not easy to get people to agree to that. I think what happens is most clients are again, they're in too big a hurry. They don't want to sit down and spend that amount of time. The key is going to the project sponsor. We were fortunate in this case because the project sponsor knew her organization well enough to know that she was going to get a lot of pushback that was going to cause us to miss project deadlines if we didn't get the consensus at the beginning. We had one manager in particular who didn't want to come. They make their own machines to make their donuts at Krispy Kreme. They don't have somebody else make them. Well, that, of course, means when those machines don't work, they call the guy who's head of that department, and he has to go out and fix those machines. He was the one who didn't want to come to the blueprint meeting. So our client called him up and said, you know, I really need you to be at this meeting. And he said, no, I don't have time for that, Barbara. And she said, well, tell me, when's the last time you had somebody call you at 3 o'clock in the morning to go fix some donut machines? And he said, well, Barbara, you know that happens about twice a week. Well, would you like for that to stop or be less, or do you like doing that? And he said, well, I really would like that to stop. So she said, well, if you come to this meeting and you look at what's going to be in the training program, do you think if these people are better trained that you might have less failures on that equipment? So he showed up for the meeting. So it's just a matter of whoever your client is and knows those people in that organization is going to have to be in partnership with you to agree to get the people that you need to come to the meeting to make sure you get the input so that you can get the buy-in so that people aren't second-guessing you throughout the project. I'd say that first example was one of the best we've ever had. Okay, I'm ready to look at our third strategy now, and that is formative evaluation. If you haven't heard this guy Tyagi speak at a conference, I recommend you seek him out. He's excellent. I attended one of his conferences, one of his sessions recently on formative evaluation. He had the best definition of formative and summative evaluation I've ever heard. Formative is to improve and summative is to prove. Measurement proves what people have accomplished in the learning. That's summative, and that's the 4 levels of Kirkpatrick, which I think a lot of people are familiar with that. People are not as familiar with formative evaluation, which we also call learner validation. But that is to improve the process. And what we're doing here is we're actually involving learners in the design process. They help us improve our designs, and it's a 2-step process. This is basically the Handshaw instructional design process, if you will. We start out with the analysis. We do some design work, write performance objectives, come up with an instructional strategy and a measurement strategy. We conduct our blueprint. And once we've had the blueprint meeting is where we get the input from all the managers, the SMEs, we just discussed that. So we now know what the plan is going to be. The next thing we do is develop a prototype that exemplifies that plan. So is it a prototype that we can use to test our instructional strategy to see if it works with learners? Prototypes in cases of e-learning are fairly simple. It can be a 20 to 30-minute course or module out of that course. In instructor-led training, we'll try to take an hour to 2 of the class that exemplifies the main strategy, and we'll develop that. What we do then is we look for 4 to 6 learners, and we ask those learners to participate in a learner tryout. We let them know that we're not evaluating them, we're evaluating the instruction. We basically, in the case of a learner tryout, it's very informal. We ask people to think out loud for us. They go through the learning, they give us feedback, they tell us what they're thinking, they tell us what's working, what's not working, and we get incredible data out of this. Once we do that, we go back, we might have to revise some of the analysis data that was wrong. We might change some design steps, and we'll build another prototype. In some cases, if the prototype was really rough, we might want to try it again. It's sort of a cost versus risk thing. It does cause some managers heartburn letting learners away from their jobs to do this. Again, we're not talking about a long time. If we have a 30-minute e-learning module, we can get someone in and out of the process in about an hour. So we're not talking about a huge amount of time, but by the fact that we're getting feedback from actual learners, it's really a valuable part of the process. The next part of that process is called a field test. And in this one, we've done our analysis, our design, had our blueprint meeting, tested the prototype, we produced the entire course, and we're ready to implement. Before we go to implementation, the last part of the production phase is a field test. This is pretty easy to find time for because everybody is going to have the first audience that's going to see that course. We just say the first time you use it, we want to have access to about 20 of those people, and we just want them to fill out a questionnaire as they go. We ask them to make comments on things as they go, and then we'll have a interview before and afterwards. Again, the instructions on how to conduct a learner tryout and a field test are on our website, and I'm going to give you that information at the end here. So that's the process for having learners add value to design for us. Here is another case study that we've done. We are going to develop a prototype that represents the outcome of the blueprint meeting. We conduct that learner tryout of the prototype and make revisions to the strategies and the prototype content, and then we conduct a field test. So here is our example. This is a revised curriculum for frontline workers. Again, I think in this case it's, okay, this is another bank. We tried and measured 2 different strategies. Have you ever had those situations where your team is sitting around and somebody says, oh, we need to teach it this way? And somebody else says, no, that won't work. We need to use this way. Or the client says, we need to use this way. We have those situations all the time. Arguing with clients about our opinion versus their opinion doesn't always work for us. So when we're trying to do that, we use data. Clients will react to data much better than they will to opinions. So we're going to try these strategies on learners, and learners will always be able to tell you definitively which one is going to work better. So I have an example here. This is an application for forklift training. And in this situation, we have 2 different ways to show people how a forklift works. We have a photo way and an animation way. And if you look at recent research about what works better, real photos or graphic animations, they'll tell you that the photo includes so much extraneous information that it actually doesn't teach as well as an animation, which just picks out what you're trying to demonstrate in the product. So here we're trying to demonstrate a 2-wheel front steer. You can see those 2 front wheels are turned. If I click on the second one, you can see all wheels are turned, and that's a 4-wheel steer. And then lastly, we have a crab steer. Okay, so these are the 3 different ways: crab steer, 4-wheel steer, and 2-wheel front steer. That's one way to show that particular process. I'm going to show you the other one now. Now here's our animation way. We're going to start with the crab steer. Then we're going to go to the 4-wheel steer. And then we're going to go to the 2-wheel front steer. You can pretty well tell by looking at those 2 diagrams that the animation was much more demonstrative of what that machine was doing and how it made it do it. Believe it or not, we had big discussions on the team and with the client as to which one was going to work better. Once we tried it with actual learners, the learners, I don't think anybody preferred the photo method. Everybody preferred the animation method. That was the one that they understood. So that's a case where formative evaluation can solve those arguments over which is going to work and which isn't. So here's another example of a different, this is a software system application again where we had frontline workers. We identified functionality changes, which identified the whole course. This was the large 4,500-hour project again, and we found functionality changes throughout the entire course that we needed to make changes on. Just the functionality changes and how the system worked that were incorrect, that learners and a learner tryout helped us figure out, saved us about an additional 80 hours of changes that we would have had to make. So that was, basic. There are things wrong. This is not how the system works, and we got those changed. And that by doing it with a prototype before we got into the entire project, we saved about 80 hours of development time. Additionally, we identified some important changes to the implementation plans. As we worked through a lot of the classroom components in a learner tryout, we found out that we made some wrong assumptions about how this should be implemented. We were able to fix those. We modified some key course materials throughout the course, especially a lot of the job aids and the learner support materials. We modified those. I think one of the most important things that we identified in the learner tryout of this particular product was in getting positive feedback from the instructor group. The client who is developing this, the developers develop these courses and pass them on to the facilitators, and they oftentimes get a lot of criticism from the facilitators. If you would just develop these courses better, we could teach them better. And so there was always a lot of tension here. What we did to defray that tension was we invited the instructors to attend the learner tryout. They were able to see how learners reacted with these new materials, and they were able to see the feedback from the learners, the positive feedback. When they went back out to the field, they were all ready to have this course, couldn't wait to get it, and were bought into the design of the course. So that was a huge benefit that we got that you normally wouldn't expect. But it's oftentimes you'll get great PR from people participating in a learner tryout. Learners love to be asked for their opinion. And finally, the pushback about, well, we don't have time to do formative evaluation. This was about 150 hours, which out of that 4,500 hour budget, again, was about 2.7% of our total budget. As far as we're concerned, learners contribute some of the most valuable design ideas in developing training, and to miss the opportunity of getting learners' input as you're developing the training is a big missed opportunity. So at 2.7% of my budget, I'll spend that every time.
Dick, we've got a couple of questions. The first one I think you may have just answered, but talking about the formative evaluation, how do you get people to actually participate in that? And then the second question is asking about how much success that you've had in getting the clients to track and use that data.
On the first question, we are an outside vendor to these companies, and we have a certain quality control and quality assurance that we put into our programs. And so if our clients balk at letting us do a learner tryout or a field test, we simply say to them, hey, you can skip that part. Whatever is built, you've bought it. We say, if you let us do the formative evaluation, we'll guarantee that it works. So I would say you try the same thing with internal clients, is let them know it's a quality assurance phase. We're using learners to evaluate the instructional materials. And learners give us great ideas. They give us great design ideas. So it's really let your client know that it's a quality assurance step for them. And again, we use the cost versus risk formula. If there's a high risk that we're trying a new strategy that we haven't used before, we definitely want to work with our client to understand that we need to spend a little bit of extra time to make sure that that's going to work before we develop the entire course. It's easy to change when you're just doing a prototype that's 30 minutes out of an 8-hour course. It's a lot harder to change if you've done the whole thing and you have to make changes throughout the entire course. So it's a matter of showing the client what's in it for them. And again, we usually run about 2 to 3% of total budget for doing the formative evaluation. It just doesn't take that long. What was that second question, Dan, about the measurement? And once we have actually finished the course, getting clients to go back and measure results to see if we accomplished what we were supposed to accomplish, very hard to do. It seems in today's world, once somebody has finished a training program, they just want to move on to the next training program. And so to spend time going back to evaluate how the one that you just did is going to work is pretty difficult to do. I think if you're an internal practitioner, you might have more influence over that than external practitioners because you're there when the results come in. I think it's always a good idea. If you want to get buy-in to use good instructional design processes, the more you can gather that data to say, we did this and it worked better, I think it's going to be a lot easier to sell the process of instructional design if you can gather some data. So it's in our best interest as designers to do that. So in terms of why should you use formative evaluation, you know, I just tell people why guess when you can measure. If you're guessing at this strategy is going to work better, no, that strategy is going to work better, why guess when you can measure? Try both strategies, make a short prototype of each one, put them in front of a half a dozen learners. You will get a trend every time. If you put it in front of a half a dozen learners, you'll usually get four to five, if not 6 of them, to tell you the same thing. This is what's going to work better than that. So I have done lots and lots of learner tryouts and field tests, and we always get tremendous data out of those. If I send my staff out to do a learner tryout and they come back and I say, how did it go? And they say, oh, it was great. Everybody loved it. That's not necessarily good news to me. When they come back and say, it went pretty well, but we learned a lot. You know, this strategy that we thought was going to work didn't. We figured out a better one. Those are the successful learner tryouts. You can't be afraid of failure in a learner tryout. And I'll get to that in a second too. Is that some people are afraid of that, but you don't really need to be. So measure your results and prove the value is the last strategy here. Why don't people measure? Well, Richard Pearlstein is a measurement specialist who spoke to our ISPI chapter a while back, and he told us a lot of reasons why people don't measure, and this is from his research, but I think the most interesting one is people don't measure because they don't want to know the real results. I think that sums it all up. So if you're having trouble getting people to measure things, keep in mind that they don't want to know the real results, and so you have to approach that from a different perspective. Instead of keeping that data, telling everybody what your data is, my strategy here is to use the negative results to learn what to do better the next time, and then use the positive results to show what worked and created value. So, point is, if you have bad things happen out of your measurement, you don't have to tell people. When we have a bad learner tryout, it's actually a good learner tryout for us. Only 6 learners saw that, and we shared it with our client, but we said, all right, this is what's not working. We looked at the positive, this is what is working. We really used the negative results to make revisions, to make the thing work, and then we used the positive results to tell people what worked and why. And basically, if you use formative evaluation and you use that learner data, you won't have to sell your concepts to people. You just let that data speak for itself. I have seen it work time and time again where clients are uneasy with what we're doing. We put it in front of learners, and they see the acceptance and the mistakes in the learning from the learner's perspective, and it's really easy to convince people what to do next. You won't have to convince them. It's very obvious to everybody. So it's a great step, not a great cost, but it gives you great benefit. And finally, let's review our strategies here. Before I review the 3 strategies, I'm just going to say a little bit about performance consulting. Performance consulting is the process of working with a client to identify what their business needs are and making sure that the training goals match up with the business goals. I think that's always a really good thing to use before your instructional design. I would call instructional design doing things right, the most efficient way, and I would call performance consulting doing the right things. You just want to make sure first that you are addressing a true learning need with your training. Once you've done that, all your measurement is going to work backwards to show how you are supporting a business goal. If you're developing training that doesn't really have a business goal to it, even if you've done a good job with the training, you're not going to be able to show those positive results. And again, this is all about proving value, demonstrating value through your results. So if you haven't identified the business goal in the first place, it's going to be hard to do that. And now our strategies here. Engage the client in the task analysis. Remember, this doesn't have to be an expensive task, but it's a very worthwhile task to make sure that you know what the outcome is going to be before you start to build the product. And again, it shouldn't take more than 6 to 10% of your budget. Conducting the blueprint meeting is the one where we're trying to get consensus among all the project sponsors, the SMEs, everyone else in the process. It saves tremendous time in not having people second guess you once you've decided what your measurement and your instructional strategy is going to be. Formative evaluation, really a small investment of time, but allowing your learners to help you in your design process by testing a prototype and then by testing the entire product in what we call a field test is a great way to make sure you put out a product that you know exactly how it's going to perform before you put it out. You never have to wonder what's going to happen once you put that project in front of learners. So those are our 3 strategies. I got to follow up with a quote from one of my favorite authors. Mark Twain always said that few things are harder to put up with than the annoyance of a good example. So if you just make an example to your clients out of the instructional design processes that you use, your clients will see that these processes are in their best interest, and you won't have to convince people all the time that we should take time for analysis, we should take time for formative evaluation. Once they've seen it work, they'll want you to do it. We've had people who kind of struggled internally and finally came up with an important program and said, you know, let's call up that company that does that instructional design process because we know that works every time. So it does change organizations, but you have to do it by showing with examples. And finally, I told you I'd give you a website for these tools. If you'll go to dhandshaw.com, the one on the right, there is a resources tab, and under that resources tab, you'll find directions for doing a task analysis. You'll find directions for how to do formative evaluation. You'll find a lot of other free tools on there. Help yourself. Call me or email me if you have any questions. My email address is on that website, so I hope you get some use out of those tools. Dan, I think that about wraps us up.
Thank you, Dick. We have one more question that's come in through the chat box, and this is about performance consultation.
Okay, so the presentation is about instructional design, and yet you're finishing by talking about performance consulting. Are you suggesting that instructional designers have to become performance consultants too? Yes, I am. I teach both instructional design and performance consulting. I often teach instructional designers. I had one person ask me at the end of one class, well, what kind of skills do you think instructional designers are going to have in the future? And I definitely think that instructional designers, if they want to keep their jobs, and if we want to continue to show our value, true value to an organization, that we also have to be responsible to make sure that we're not just taking orders to make training programs, that we're designing learning programs that will make a difference to the bottom line of the organization. So yes, I really do think that instructional designers have to begin to acquire performance consulting skills. I think it's what's going to keep us employed. I think it's what's going to make the entire profession more relevant. There's no reason why we should be the first ones to be let go when there's hard times. The performance specialists are the ones that should be taken care of the best when there's hard times in an organization. And I think becoming a performance consultant and responsible for business outcomes is what's going to make that happen.
Excellent. Thank you, Dick, and thank you for those questions. As we wrap up, I'd like to remind everyone to check out successnc.org for other videos and webinars. And I want to thank once again our presenter for today, Dick Handshaw. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Any closing comments or final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just thank you very much for having me, and I hope you can find some useful tools on that website. I hope you will not be afraid to try these things. Every time I do one of these things, I always get an email from somebody saying, you know, I tried out that learner tryout thing and it saved us a bunch of money. We learned a lot from it. I really do get feedback from people who try these things that they have pretty good success. So my advice is just take one or two of them and just try it, see how it works for you.
All right, thank you, Dick. This concludes our webinar, and on behalf of North Carolina Community Colleges, thank you for your participation, and have a great day.